This is Free Talk Live, and you can bring up anything you want here, toll-free at 855-450-FREE. It's the SACL CAI toll-free line. You can join us online at freetalklive.com. We're talking about the Lincoln movie. Maybe you've seen it, and you want to share your thoughts. But we are sharing a review from Silver Underground. It is the blog site and site for the Silver Circle movie. silverunderground.com is their site. They've got some thoughts they're sharing about the film, which thankfully we don't have to go and see it because they have already done so. I don't want to give money to this movie because I know, it's going to be propaganda, straight up Hollywood propaganda about who they think Lincoln was, this great emancipator, this hero of the slaves, when in point of fact, his own quotes, which are easily sourceable and attributable to him, make it pretty clear that he really didn't care about black people at all. All he wanted was to keep the Union together. He wanted to keep his power intact and as high of a level as possible, and was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that that happened. We'll continue about Lincoln here in a moment, because I know, Johnny Ray, you've got a quote to share. We can, of course, take your calls about anything, but Johnny Ray, you were in the middle of a quote, a very revealing quote from Lincoln. Why don't you start the quote at the top so anyone just tuning in can hear the whole thing?
I certainly will. Quote, this is from 1858, the fourth debate with Stephen A. Douglas.
All right.
Quote, I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality.
So he was a straight-up racist. I mean, it wasn't just that he wanted to preserve the Union, which was what, he definitely wanted, and that's why he did any amount of emancipating the slaves, was simply to, serve his interests with the Union. But, I mean, it sounds like he's just a straight-up racist.
Yeah, he was, as so many men were in 1858. Quote,
is that the end of the quote? There's more?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And, inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior.
Oh, my.
And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race.
Despicable. So there's more here from Silver Underground. They actually quote a shorter version of the one you just read, and they continue their opinion on the film. Most Northerners did not oppose slavery. In fact, Lincoln explicitly supported slavery in his first inaugural address. Many Southern slaveholders favored staying in the Union because slavery was constitutionally protected, while the volatility of a new Confederacy made it unclear whether slavery would continue. The fact of the matter is that it was a disagreement over economic policy, not slavery, that was the motivation for secession and Northern aggression. When Lincoln began his political career in the Illinois legislature, he said, quote, my politics are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I am in favor of a national bank, in favor of the internal improvements system, and a high protective tariff, unquote. Lincoln was a political novice whose campaign was bankrolled by Northern industrialists. They aimed to hike taxes on the South to fund welfare for corporations in the North. Southern states felt bullied by the Northern majority and preferred a policy of free trade, which is why the Confederate Constitution read, no bounties shall be granted from the Treasury, nor shall any duties or taxes on importation from foreign nations be laid to promote or foster any branch of industry. Why do you think Lincoln blockaded the ports so early in the conflict? Do you see? Lincoln wanted the high import tariffs and high taxes to subsidize wealthy corporate campaign donors. The Confederacy wanted to create a free trade zone with no tariffs, low taxes, and no corporate subsidies. As Confederate President Jefferson Davis said during his inaugural address, the South wanted the freest trade our necessities will permit. So the South withdrew from the Union democratically, and Davis made clear they intended no hostility toward the North by writing that, quote, we seek no conquest, no aggrandizement, no concession of any kind. All we ask is to be let alone. The war cry of the North was never free the slaves, but to preserve the Union, because a free trade zone to the South would spoil the plans of Lincoln's corporate sponsors. The 13th Amendment, which abolished chattel slavery, was supported by a majority of the Southern states. Every other country in the New World ended slavery without violence, with the exception of the Haitian Revolution, which was a slave revolt and not a civil war. The Civil War was essentially a very bloody tax revolt, followed by a successful propaganda campaign. 855-450-FREE. That story over at silverunderground.com. Thanks to whoever wrote it. It's not attributed here. Over there on their site for taking the time to go and see the movie and share their comments on it. 855-450-FREE. You can take control here. Bring up whatever you want. Free speech crackdown in a bunch of places. Pete will tell us about it coming
up. You're pretty hard on George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. For those in the audience who have not been exposed to Mr. Napolitano, let me say this. I have rarely met anybody who censors himself less. I'm going to challenge you.
Is that a good thing that I don't censor myself, or a bad thing?
I'm going to be challenging you with a checklist in a minute to see how far you'll go. But you talked about George Washington as a slave owner, and a very active slave owner.
Yes.
And
the Pennsylvania story.
Yeah, the Pennsylvania story. I mean, you said, quote, Washington punished his slaves by whipping or selling them, divided their families so they can work more efficiently, and provided them with as little means as tolerable. He also raffled off the slaves of those bankrupt slave holders who owed him money. Washington's most gruesome act as a slave owner came in 1784, 5 years before he became president. What was it?
He had the teeth of some of his slaves removed and implanted in his own mouth. He had the toes of some of his slaves cut off. There was no anesthesia at the time, so that they couldn't escape, so that they couldn't run away. And then when the capital of the country was in Philadelphia, and the state of Pennsylvania had said all slaves in the state shall be forthwith set free after 6 months, he and Martha rotated the slaves through from Mount Vernon in Virginia up to Pennsylvania so that they were rotated out before the end of 6 months, so he never had to set them free. This is the President of the United States and his wife engaged in a conspiracy and actively frustrating and violating the Pennsylvania law. Of course, they weren't prosecuted because half the country accepted slavery at the time.
It was legal. Slavery was legal.
Not in Pennsylvania.
And not under natural law, as you point out. You're also very critical of Lincoln, his hypocrisy. You know, the usual historians say, look, these were other times. You have to forgive them this. They at least helped create a constitution with a Bill of Rights. You're more merciless on Lincoln, who you called the tyrant. Could you describe his back and forth with the border states and his position on slavery and what the real cause, you believe, of the Civil War was?
Question. Did the Emancipation Proclamation free the slaves? Answer. It established and permitted slavery in the border states. You really have to read the document before you can understand that. Question. Was Abraham Lincoln interested in freeing the slaves? No. Abraham Lincoln said, I don't care if we have slaves or not. I just have to keep these southern states in the government because my job is to keep the country together because we don't have an income tax. And if we don't collect duties from the ports, and most of them are in the southern states, we can't have a federal government if that money is not coming in. Look, Lincoln arrested 3,000 journalists and publishers and editors in the North. These are not guys with guns shooting at federal soldiers. These are people arrested because of their words, because of what they said about the war. And he had them tried before military tribunals, every one of which was invalidated after Lincoln's death by a Supreme Court that he had just appointed that said the Constitution exists in good times and in bad. When the legislature of Maryland was about to enact legislation he didn't like, he sent troops to arrest every single legislator. He argued against the right to secession, but he caused West Virginia to secede from Virginia so we could have 2 more senators in the Senate and more representatives in the House of Representatives. He was the most tyrannical, most disingenuous, least faithful to the Constitution president we've had in American history. His troops burnt courthouses, raped women, robbed banks, killed civilians on a large scale for the first time in the history of the world, all in the name of a defensive war.
And you say it was the prime cause, was not slavery?
In my view, the prime cause was Lincoln's fear that the government would collapse if it didn't have economic activity from the South, particularly duties and excise taxes collected at every port from Wilmington to Houston. There were only 3 other ports in the country, Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. All the others were in the South. They lost 75%, or were due to lose 75% of the income from those ports.
And you mentioned states' rights in your book, too.
States' rights is a difficult argument to make because
on the Civil War.
On the Civil War, of course, because 8 of the states believed that they had the power to suspend the free will of individuals on the basis of their color. An abominable, condemnable, horrific state of affairs about which I wrote in Dred Scott's Revenge, but not something Lincoln was interested in eradicating. If he was, why would he have said to the border states and to New Orleans, you can keep slavery, which is what he said in the so-called Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, of course, a lot of Lincoln's apologist is, he was in the Civil War. His top priority was preserving the Union, and he would do anything to preserve the Union.
Even kill innocents. I mean, if the Constitution prohibits anything, it prohibits executing people without due process.
Do you think we would have lost the Union if he performed with due process and more humane?
I think slavery would have died a natural death as it did in Great Britain and Portugal and Brazil and France and Puerto Rico, and we would have stayed as a confederation of some sort.